What if your organization's sensitive data suddenly became inaccessible, encrypted by cybercriminals demanding a ransom for its release? How would you respond? Unfortunately, this nightmare scenario is a reality for countless businesses targeted by ransomware attacks. Today, we're going to discuss some proactive strategies to help mitigate that risk and minimize the impact of ransomware incidents. Now, before we jump into that, just some quick introductions. My name is Lee Kirkpatrick. I'm an incident lead with the Sophos incident response team, and this presentation has been co-created by Paul Jacobs, who is an incident team lead with the Sophos incident response practice. Our primary responsibilities are for responding to cyber attacks for a global customer base, and unfortunately, a lot of that is to do with ransomware. So that's why we'll be talking about that here today. So, as previously mentioned, we deal with ransomware on pretty much a day-to-day basis. It unfortunately is still a really common occurrence. So, it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. In the bottom right, there are some statistics from the Sophos Data Ransomware Report that show that in 2022 and 2023, 66% of organizations underwent some form of ransomware attack that impacted their organization. And this is primarily because ransomware groups don't care about the organization that they're impacting. There are exceptions to that rule, of course, but typically it's opportunistic in nature. So it impacts organizations of all shapes and sizes. We've dealt or helped organizations that only have a handful of servers and a few employees that have undergone a ransomware incident, and it's nearly crippled their business because, again, these ransomware actors are looking for unpatched public-facing assets, easy entry points into your organization, looking for those organizations that don't invest in security, that are easy to encrypt and exfil data and extort in order to get a payout. Ransomware is also run as a service, which means that it lowers that barrier of entry for would-be attackers, meaning that there are specific people who can specialize in each part of that ransomware chain. That unfortunately means that there are a lot of ransomware affiliates that work under one group brand, meaning that there are lots of attacks typically associated with one ransomware group, allowing more people to become ransomware actors. So we know ransomware isn't going away anytime soon. We know it is something that we need to prepare for. What can we do in order to help mitigate that impact of ransomware or stop them getting in the first place? What we've listed here are some of the 7 sins of ransomware preparedness. Now, this isn't a definitive list. This is just some of the common defensive and proactive measures organizations have overlooked and potentially what led them to actually experience that ransomware attack. So number one is not having a patch management plan. A lot of organizations neglect or defer patching their public-facing assets because it's going to have impact on the business. It's going to have downtime. That patch could potentially break the appliance or various things internally. So a lot of organizations neglect patching. But unfortunately, it's one of the most common initial access vectors is where an exploit becomes available for that public-facing asset. It hasn't been patched, and then ransomware groups take advantage of it. The second one is multi-factor authentication or lack thereof. A lot of the investigations that we've worked this year and last year, and just in general, have involved the attacker somehow obtaining a valid account and directly logging into a VPN that didn't have MFA. Now, of course, multi-factor authentication isn't the be-all and end-all of security, but it adds that extra layer of security, which makes it more difficult for attackers to obtain access. And had those organizations implemented multi-factor authentication, it would have potentially either slowed down the attacker or completely diverted their gaze to another organization to attack. The third item is having no backup plan. And we see this quite a lot with organizations that have been hit with ransomware, that they only had one form of backup, it was AV joined. The attacker has then completely destroyed those backups, meaning that there's no possible way for them to restore. Realistically, organizations should be following the 3-2-1 rule, where you have 3 different backups. 2 in separate locations and 1 offline that is immutable, and subsequently checking that those backups are working. A lot of organizations said that they've got backups, and then when they've gone to check them, they've realized that they haven't been actually working for quite some time. So yes, they can restore, but it's potentially a really old image and lots of data has been lost. So ensuring that if the worst case scenario happens, that you have backups available to restore from is incredibly important. Number four is lack of EDR deployment. A lot of organizations actually have an EDR solution, but they neglect deploying it to all of their devices. And all it takes is one device not to have an EDR that can then be exploited or accessed by an attacker in some manner that can then lead or wreak havoc on your environment. So ensuring that the EDR agent that you have is deployed, or even just having an EDR agent deployed, is a really critical aspect to help preventing ransomware. Number five is a big one, and that's ignoring antivirus alerts. Pretty much every ransomware incident that we've worked, we immediately go to the antivirus logging for whatever solution it is that organization was using. And you can almost trace the ransomware incident back just based on the alerts that were triggered by that solution for the tools that the attacker was trying to use. And a lot of organizations will ignore these alerts rather than actually investigating them and finding out why they're occurring. They think that antivirus is doing its job, which it is, but they're not investigating those further. And at some point, the attacker is going to use tools or techniques that aren't detected by your antivirus. So ensuring that you don't ignore those alerts is imperative to preventing a ransomware attack. Number six is not having any cyber insurance or a retainer. Ransomware attacks are unfortunately incredibly expensive, so you're going to want to have some insurance in order to help pay for that. Also, having an incident response firm on a retainer is incredibly important as well, because for these types of incidents, you want to respond to them as quickly as possible, because the longer your business is down, the more amount of money that's going to cost. So what you want to do is have these things in place prior to a ransomware attack potentially taking place. And the final one, number seven, is not having an incident response plan. Reacting to an incident is an incredibly complex issue, and there are lots of items that often are overlooked by organizations on how they should react and respond to incidents, especially ransomware attacks. So having that incident response plan, running it through tabletop exercises so that you get a better understanding of whether that incident response plan works, what the gaps are, and how you're going to successfully respond to a ransomware incident or an incident in general is an incredibly important item to not overlook. Now, of course, investing in security and investing in all of those items that we've previously discussed in the last slide are going to cost money. But unfortunately, a ransomware incident is going to cost money, and it's going to cost you a lot more money. You can see here the mean recovery costs for organizations over the past 3 years are incredibly high. And that's because there are hidden costs associated with ransomware that a lot of organizations overlook. It's not just the potential ransom demand that you're going to have to pay in order to get your data back, but depending on the organization and country that you work in, there could be legal fees and fines. There's also going to be huge recovery costs, even if you do pay the ransom. Getting those systems decrypted and back up and running is going to be and take a lot of work. Also, ransomware groups don't just encrypt data anymore, but they exfiltrate sensitive data as well, and then they threaten to publicly disclose that unless a ransom is paid. There are some ransomware groups who don't even encrypt anymore, but merely just perform exfiltration. All of these are going to lead to damage to reputation, which is going to cause loss of business. There's going to be extensive operational disruptions, all of which are going to cost a lot of money. Especially when that incident is being investigated, the incident response firm is probably going to ask you to make a lot of changes and shut certain things down whilst they have the time to get up to speed with what the ransomware actor actually did, because they don't want that happening to you again. So you are going to be down for some time, not just due to the ransomware incident, but for the time it takes for the incident response team to perform their investigation as well. So we're going to leave things there. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this presentation has been useful for you.